Welcome to Therapist Spotlight.
Hello everybody and welcome to Anta's Therapist Spotlight, the podcast where we aim to showcase our wonderful members to the wider community. I'm your host Joshua Brooks, and with us tonight is Lizzi George. Lizzi is a natural health practitioner that helps gut health with mental health issues, and it's going to be really interesting because I think it's a fundamental topic that we don't talk much about. So Lizzi, how are you tonight?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. So, first question, what got you into natural health and natural medicine?
Well, I was sick, so I find that most natural health practitioners are either sick or someone in their family was sick when they decided that they wanted to go down this crazy road. So I was pretty sick as a kid. I went to a Chinese medicine guru called Ki Li, and he was this very old man who used to have his toe sticking out of his worn out Ugg boots, and he was just brilliant. He changed my life. For 15 years I'd been trying to get a solution through mainstream medicine, in 25 minutes he resolved something that took 15 years. So it was really great, and so I went down that path after that.
And so what grabbed you then about naturopathy, and in particular naturopathy for gut health to influence mental health and mental well-being?
So I'd always had a keen interest in mental health. So there's a lot of mental health in my family, or mental health problems in my family. And there's, I've had friends who've suicided and things like that in the past. And that was all young when I was young. So that really forms part of your psyche and your development. So I always had that interest there. And then the more I knew about one area, the more I got interested in that one area. And then, of course, I started obsessing about stool testing and how the microbiome changes our neurochemistry and how that has a play-on effect to our hormones and all of our other systems. So I basically focused, I know a whole lot about one little area, but that little area is the most, I guess, in my opinion, important part of our body. So until we get that all working properly, nothing works. So, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And so then how does it work? If I'm a client who's coming to see you, how does your consultation work? Are there specific clients that you will take because it is such like a niche area? What's that process look like if I'm sitting there and thinking that, I could really benefit from this?
Okay, so yes, I'm a niche practitioner, so I am limited to the amount of consults I can do in the month. So, and I do get a lot of referrals. So, basically for me, the first thing I do is qualify my client. So I do a free 30-minute consultation. I find out about their health conditions. And then if I think I can get a good outcome, they will be invited to work with the Health Recovery Centre, which is my business. And from there, we determine what testing we require, and the duration that we expect treatment to last, the cost of the treatment, all those sorts of things. So I give all of that type of information in that first 30-minute consultation once I ascertain the person's health conditions or health information. And then from there, we do our testing, and then we start treatment once we get the results of that. So I don't treat without testing because I think it's just guesswork. So it's very important to me to make sure we do the testing up front. We get all the data we need. So our treatments are accurate and effective from day one. So I don't muck about and go, I'll save you some cash in testing and we'll treat you for an extra 12 months because we got it wrong at the start. So it's really just about making sure that we get all of the data that we can and treating effectively from there.
I guess that's one of the advantages of when you are dealing with such complex cases as mental health and microbiome, you can really narrow it down and sort of target in on what's going on, and you can fix that a lot quicker than mucking about.
Yeah.
And
and you can't guess that because it is so intricate. Like with microbiome stuff, you can have so many different bacterial pictures look like so many other bacterial pictures. You really can't guess it. So it's so important to have the information up front. And if you are guessing it, you're doing the client a disservice. It's just not going to work out for them in most cases. So even an educated guess doesn't always make it the right answer when you're trying to treat. So sometimes I go, my friend, I'll try this. And I'm like, oh God, I got that wrong. So it's always best to make sure, even after all of these years of doing this, you still cannot guess what's going on. So yeah, I'm very obsessed about testing. So unfortunately, that does mean that my clients do have to catch their stool and do a stool sample. So that's not very fun for them, but it always makes sure their treatment's effective long term.
Well, so let's talk about that. So what kind of testing are you looking for? So again, is this a testing that can just be done through their GP, or do they need to come and see you and get a correct recommendation for the test that they need? How does that whole work for them? And yeah, what's that look like for you?
Okay, so that depends on the client. So some clients will only need to do, say, for example, it was a clear-cut situation where they had high cortisol from extreme stress. Well, we know we just have to do hormone testing. But if it's a situation where that's been going on a bit longer, their digestive system's looking a bit iffy, or they're getting other symptoms of mental health problems or fatigue or cognitive issues, those sorts of things, then we want to do a bit more broad testing. We need to know the full picture. There's no point just focusing on one area when other areas can be implicated. To get the testing done, so I do some testing through the GP wherever possible. We try and get things through Medicare, but of course we're just asking the GP to do what they recommend. We certainly can't be like, I demand my GP does this testing. It doesn't work like that. Your GP has to have reasoning to do that, and your GP's hands are tied in a lot of cases as to what they can test. And then there's other more specific testing like the stool testing. So I use Bioscreen Medical for stool testing, which is associated with Melbourne University, and they're doing one of the biggest microbiome testing, research in the world at the moment. So it's just absolutely brilliant to be able to work with them. The stool testing that you get done through your GP is just looking for things that can kill you. So it's sort of looking for things like Giardia, Clostridium difficile, some of the bacterial infections that we're familiar with. You know, any of that is a bad thing. Whereas what we're looking for on the bioscreen testing is a quantitative analysis. So we're looking for how much of certain bacteria are there. So it's not so relevant. I mean, the species are relevant, but say, for example, a Streptococcus species, if there's less than 5%, you're okay. But if there's 80%, then there's a big problem. So it's more that quantitative analysis that makes it relevant as to how we treat that going forward.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. And so then we'll move on to it. How does a treatment look? Is there a set amount of treatment plans that you like to get people in for? What sort of herbs and nutraceuticals and sort of naturopathic tools will you bring to treat that person? How does that look?
Okay, so I do herbs, I do nutraceuticals, I do probiotics, depending on the specific bacterial issue. So if they have low E. coli, we have to introduce E. coli. If they have low lactobacillus, we have to introduce it. So certainly there are, that's how we actually treat it. As far as duration goes, that's sort of how long's a piece of string. So most microbiome treatments will take a minimum of sort of 4 to 6 months. That doesn't mean that it's suddenly fixed. So, for example, I have clients that have had IBS for 50 years, and they're finally going, oh, I didn't know that you could treat this. So now they're getting treatment done. We're sort of, in some cases, at sort of 12 months or a little bit longer. And that's because we have a lot of damage to undo. Also, depending on the age of the client and the overall health status of the client, depends on how quickly they recover. So in some cases, they have chronic protein deficiencies that are really long term, just because they haven't been digesting food well. And so as they start to get a bit better and a bit better, that can take a bit longer than, say, somebody that's sort of in their teens or early 20s that's, much more active, and we can improve things a bit quicker there because their cellular function's a bit faster. So it just depends on the duration that they've been sick for and what their actual concern is as to the length of time. But I don't have specific set times. It's a pay-as-you-go scenario.
And so then do you also look at like their overall health landscape moving forward after you've corrected the gut? Like, so are you so in your practice, do you give them like a meal plan for the rest of their life to nourish their gut, or how to eat and how to take herbs and stuff for the rest of their life after you sort of fix that initial treatment, because you are a niche and you've got a lot of clients? How does that sort of work? Or do you refer on once you've cleared that? How does that work in your world?
So to fix the microbiome, you have to fix neurotransmitters, you have to fix stress hormones, and you have to fix the microbiome itself. Okay, you can't do any of those things individually because they all affect each other. So high stress hormones shut off gastric acid, which changes the pH, or so your neurotransmitters determine the speed at which your bowel moves. They determine the amount of digestive enzymes you release and gastric acid production. So all of those things need to be addressed at once. Mm-hmm. And it's very rare that at the end of that, there's really any health conditions left, because after that, you resolve those issues, general health naturally improves with the improved nutrition. And so I don't ever have people supplementing for life. The only circumstances that you would do that if you've got somebody that's in a very high stress situation that they can't change. So somebody that's caring for somebody quite ill, or, busy mums that have busy, stressful jobs, obviously you need to provide support. Yeah. But that's a little bit different to your sort of average Joe. Once they get well, they're well. Okay, your body naturally will do all of those things for us. We don't need to constantly push. You can stay on a multivitamins and things like that to give you a bit of support, but you don't need to stay on a whole host of supplements and herbal medicines long term. And then as far as diet goes, I do a very specific diet for the bacteria. So it just depends on their bacteria. So the diet is pertaining to them, and then they reintroduce that diet. So the diet goes for sort of 12 to 16 weeks, and then say in 2 years time or 3 years time, if they get some of the same symptoms back, or they find it creeping back up, they can go back on that diet, and that's usually enough to correct it if they do that very well, that they don't end up back in the same position. So but it's not something you have to sort of do forever. However, generally when people have been on a good diet and they feel quite well, they don't introduce all the crap again, because what's the point? Every time you go and put it back in, you get sort of hangover, or you feel a bit grubby the next day. So it doesn't seem much point in doing that to yourself.
Oh, yeah. I can attest to that 100% myself.
Me too. I got MSG'd last night. I woke up thinking, wow, I don't think I have any brain cells left. But it was very nice food. Sometimes it's worth it.
That's right, the trade-off, isn't it? So then when we're looking at bacteria, and so say if we've got an overgrowth, what's your personal practice around how to get rid of that? Are you a person who will refer to a GP, get some antiparasitics or antibacterial or antibiotics, to clear that up? Or are you sort of just, we'll go the full herbal route? How does that work in your practice with your clients that you see?
So it depends on the species of bacteria. So some bacteria are really pathogenic. You know that you can throw all the herbs you want in it and that's not going to do it. But that's rare with bacteria. It's more common with parasites. So parasite treatment can be a bit tricky. And I generally refer people back to a GP for parasite treatment because, say, for example, flagell, which is a common parasite treatment that we use in Australia, you take it for sort of 7 to 14 days. It's pretty nasty stuff. It makes you feel fairly nauseous for that period. But that's the whole time you have to take it for. It's about between 60 and 70% efficacy rates. And then using herbal medicines, and it costs about $30, flagell. And then using herbal medicines, it can take, 6 to 8 months, still 60 to 70% efficacy rates. And during that time, herbs have the same sort of harmful effects. Those specific herbs can still harm your digestive system the way that antibiotics can. And then, of course, can somebody afford to take herbs for 6 to 8 months? And are you just losing time? It's so often it's really important. It could cost, between $1,000 and $2,000 to take herbs for that duration of time, or $30 in flagell. And also just the time factor, like this person, before you even can start working on anything else, you've got to clear the parasites, because if they're still there at the end, you still have to take the antibiotic, and then you're doing all this damage that you then have to correct again. So I do give the client the option, but generally I prefer to send people back to the doctor in those cases. With bacteria, most of the time we can treat it through herbal medicines or nutritional medicines, which is good. It certainly makes it easier and less harmful on our bodies.
Yeah, wow. And so then I'm guessing as well, how do you handle, or do you handle sort of chemical imbalances with the gut? So say, for example, the one that everyone's talking about at the moment that jumps out at people is glyphosate, right? So glyphosate comes down, it can harm our gut bacteria. We all sort of know that now. It's quite in the parlance. How do you deal with that? Or do you deal with that? Or do you find that it's not needed? How does that work into clearing up the gut and the flora?
So honestly, glyphosate specifically, it's very easy. Don't eat things that contain glyphosate. Unfortunately, most of our meat products in Australia are glyphosate containing, so glyphosate doesn't clear. And most farming practices now, especially cattle farming, and I know because I am from a cattle farming background. So most cattle farmers, where they used to plough and sow, they now round up and just drop seed. Okay, so the soil that the grass is growing in that the cattle eat, is Roundup contaminated. And so it's very difficult to avoid those sorts of things. My opinion is you just monitor your gut. You can definitely go out of your way focusing on specific chemicals all your life, but if you get your whole system working effectively through treating all of these areas, it should take care of itself to the best of its ability. There are things we know about and we can obsess over those all we want, but there's a lot more chemicals in our environment we don't know about and we're totally powerless to do anything about. So in my opinion, we have to live in the real world. This is where we are. Obviously, we don't want those chemical toxins in our body, but this is where we live. Mm-hmm. Unless we can live out in the middle of nowhere and eat biodynamic and not have anybody within hundreds of kilometers of us, we're going to come into contact with these things. And so the best that we can do is make our system really function well to clear those as much as we can. And, if you are somebody that's susceptible to that and your bacteria drops off, get testing every 2 to 3 years and keep an eye on it. Or, most of my clients, I teach them what to look out for so that at the very start of these things going wrong, we can jump on it straight away. So it saves them thousands of dollars in treatments because they know straight away, okay, this is going on. I feel grubby again. I need to take some supplements to alleviate that now before that develops into something much bigger.
Yeah. And so I've also heard that, the people that you're around can affect your microbiome, and especially intimate partners or anything like that. So in your practice, do you find that you maybe have to treat couples, or you have to treat families, or you have to treat more than one person to get results? Or how does that sort of work, or that conversation work? Or how do you navigate that minefield, I guess, maybe?
It is a minefield. Yeah. Certainly sometimes we do have to treat a family, or we do have to treat both partners because they're eating the same foods, they're in the same environment, they tend to have similar bacteria, and those bacteria kind of merge together when we're intimate. So over a period of time, we can get other people's grubby infectious bacteria. It's nobody's fault, and it's the same with kids. Mm-hmm. So we get our microbiome from our mum. We pass through the vaginal canal and unfortunately often with our mouth open, and we land in a bit of poop, and that's great. Now we have a ready-made microbiome. The problem is that if mum doesn't have great bacteria, neither does bub. And then so sometimes we don't recognise that until we have a depressed teenager. And then we look back and say, well, mum, what about your history? And so then we would treat mum and child because it's very clear that there's a deficit throughout this whole family. And so in a lot of cases, if the children are young, you can correct it just by contact. Mm. So when you treat mum's bacteria, bub has physical contact all the time if it's an infant. Mm. And so that will correct it as long as we get mum's health right. But then there are circumstances, obviously, when the child is older where it's very clear that there's digestive issues or mental health issues, that we address that with those. And my personal belief is a lot of what we call hereditary depression is actually more associated with microbiome, similarities in family groups. So if you get microbiomes from mum and you get microbiomes from family units, and you grow up in a household with, a poor microbiome, and then that you'll see addiction and trauma, and you'll see mental health problems in those people. And then the next generation will have that too, and the next generation will have that too, because they're getting the same microbiome. Mm. And then so we look at it and we say it's all about trauma and those sorts of things. But even people in, comfortable environments can have these problems if the microbiome isn't right. So certainly there's that nature versus nurture, but there's also this physical component of these hereditary conditions, especially when it comes to mental and gut health.
Mm. And so then do you look at a lot of like postnatal depression, and do you treat mums and infants much in your practice? Or
I do, and it's something that I'm getting more of. I don't know where they're coming from, but I do have quite a few in the last probably 12 months. And I don't know if it's more just because we're discussing it more, or whether somebody from a local mothers group has just told everybody. So either way, I'm grateful.
Yep.
But it's really good because it means that these mothers that haven't really addressed their concerns because they've been very family focused are now going, okay, so I actually have to get better to make sure that my kids are well. So it's really great because it's changing these whole cycles where the family patterns where everybody gets stuck in these depressed or anxious states. So it's really good. I'm really grateful to have those type of clients.
And so then, like you were saying, the contact for children can be so powerful for changing their microbiome. When would you say that when would you say that the child has to be treated as in compared to the mum? Is that sort of like when they are up and walking like that toddler, or can you treat the mum up until they're sort of 7 or 8? When's that sort of that cutoff where you think, well, the child really needs to be treated by themselves as compared to like the mum and the parents? Or where does that sort of work in?
Well, so we believe that commensal bacteria, which is sort of our microbiome map, is developed by the time we're around 18 months.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the latest scientific evidence is showing that beyond 18 months, we develop our own microbiome mapping rather than referring back. So from there, we've got what our body deems as normal bacteria. But if you've got sick mum that's been on antibiotics, or sick infant that's had, chest infections and things like that, that's been on regular antibiotics, that is then telling, your signaling is telling that infant, you have to always have this crappy bacteria. So we have to sort of override that. And that signaling comes again through bacteria, which is quite cool. So to change that immunity, we have to change the bacteria. And so sort of from about 18 months, 2 years onwards, you'd be looking at treating that infant separately. But infants are a bit easier to treat because we don't need to treat mental health stuff. We just need to treat just that bacterial component. It's quite easy to do because we can just split a capsule and pop it on some food and those sorts of things. So it's easy enough to do. And if they're still breastfeeding, we can do that through mum's milk. And if they're not, we can do it through formula. So it's very simple.
Yeah, wonderful. And so then you have said that you're sort of looking for that niche client. What is your ideal client? What clients are you looking for, and how do you determine if they're going to be a good fit for you, and how does that work going through your clinic?
So predominantly it's willingness and capacity. So if they have the capacity, as in mentally, if they can do it, or have enough supports in place. So you have to remember that by the time people are quite mentally ill, they have poorer cognition. And they have really low energy and they feel really terrible, and motivation, it's just nowhere. So those clients really need support from family members. You wouldn't take those clients on if they're in quite a bad state and expect them to be able to do this sort of thing. They don't have the capacity. And when it comes to willingness, are you willing to change your diet? Because you've got to be. And are you willing to take things that taste gross? Because you've got to be. You've got to be willing to do that. And you have to be able to do it as far as financially goes as well, because it's not a short process. It is something that's going to be in the thousands of dollars, not hundreds of dollars, over that period between sort of 6 and 12 months, depending on how long the treatment goes for and how severe the situation is. And I'm very fortunate that most of my clients are very willing because they're very desperate. They've done the mainstream thing. Very few clients come to me before they do the mainstream thing because there's no need to do it yet. They still feel that there's hope in that mainstream system. So I get the clients that have, that are very depressed, very anxious, that have, been to every gastro and had cameras up and down everywhere and nothing's changing, and they're just not feeling well and nobody's listening to them. And then because their digestive system's just collapsed, then their mental health is going downhill and they keep getting told that it's psychosomatic and things like that. So, it's rare that I do have to turn a client away, but if I realistically don't think I'm going to get a good outcome with them, I do, because it's not the right thing to do to start clients if they're not going to get the outcome. So always for me, I err on the side of caution. If I think I'm going to get 80% improvement, I take the client. If I think I'm not, I refer the client to a different pathway to try first. And if that doesn't work, come back. So there's loads of options. I'm fortunate enough that I work with a retreat as well. So I have loads of contacts locally, and internet, like nationally, that I can refer people to and say, try this therapy first. If that doesn't work, come back here. So if we can give options that are less expensive, that have a potential to work before we get to something like this, then we should always try that, because at the end of the day, the outcome for the client has to be number one.
Yeah, and then I'm guessing with that in mind, is there any way that they can get like NDIS help and come to you, or is there any sort of mental health subsidies that can come through, especially if they're recommended by their GP, or does that not sort of work quite with the naturopathy thing?
So the NDIS specifically excludes naturopathy.
Yeah, okay, I thought so.
In fact, it's one of the only things that's specifically excluded.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you can get any other support, just not us.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Look, you know, yeah, it's frustrating, but we can't fix everything. And, you know, the more of those clients that come willing and interested in doing this, the more there'll be pushback on the government to change those types of things. And the better we do as, you know, collectively as natural health practitioners, the better that's going to be. So I do mentoring, business mentoring and naturopathic mentoring for students and people just graduated, so I can help them set up their businesses and actually be profitable and successful in their first year, so that they can continue doing this and doing it well. So the more of us that are doing a really good job of this, the better the industry is as a whole, and then we have much more legitimacy. We really need legitimacy in this industry. So when you've got people that just aren't doing a great job because they don't have the understanding, or they're always trying to err on the side of the client not spending any money or not investing anything, it's really damaging the industry. So if we want to be taken seriously, let's step up. Let's know that what we're doing is right and do a good job.
And it's something that, and it's something that I encounter a lot, is that, natural therapists, they feel so guilty for making money off their skill, but at the end of the day, you're providing value for people, and you deserve to get paid for that value that you're providing for people. And so it is a shame, because it does make some people maybe err on the side of the less expensive herb or anything like that, whereas you could actually get the more expensive herb, get them better, get them out of trouble quicker, and you'll get much more efficacy, and then you'll get a much better name and a much better referral network, and you'll start seeing more clients, which is how we get it out there to show what we can do.
Yep. If it takes 10 supplements to treat, you offer 10 supplements.
Mm-hmm.
So the worst thing a naturopath or any natural health practitioner can do is go, I'm not going to say all the things you need because I don't want you to say no. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's your job to say, this is what you need to get well. It's their choice whether they choose to do that or not. Mm-hmm. And so by qualifying them up front, you're certainly making sure they understand they're going to be on 10 supplements, 15 supplements. Okay, it's going to cost this much. So when it comes time to have that conversation, that's fine. And when you first have those conversations around, this is what it's going to cost. You know, everybody does that differently. I'm a very upfront person, so it's very simple to me. I say, this is how much it's going to cost, and tell them. So that some people don't feel comfortable with that. So they might say, well, there's an overall investment of, or, you know, can you afford something like this? But it really needs to be done that you give the client everything they need to get well. Not some of what they need to get well, because you're doing them and yourself a disservice.
And like you said, that's so important with their willingness. You're like, are you going to invest in yourself? Are you going to invest in your health? How much do you want this? Are you actually going to put in the effort? Because again, nothing comes for free. And so again, it is a bit of an effort on the client. And I think that's so important for us as natural health practitioners to actually be upfront and tell them it's going to require a little bit of work from you. Are you willing to go through it with us?
Yep. And there are people that really struggle. Say, for example, I do a lot of nurses. So they do shift work. It's very difficult to get them to eat well because they're in a crappy environment, like where there's not a lot of great options. So it can be difficult for some clients. So you just have to make it the best you can with their environment and just try and flex it the best you can to work for them.
Yeah, and I think that's where we also fit such a nice spot in the healthcare landscape, is that we can give them that education, give them that knowledge, and actually be in their corner rather than a 15-minute GP consult or whatever. They're coming to us for an hour, and we can actually talk to them and give them strategies and actually help them to plan their life a little bit more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
that's our scope.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're coming up on time, Lizzie, but just thank you so much for coming on and sharing yourself with us. If anybody's looking at contacting you, where's the best contact place for you? And is it the same for mentoring as well? What do you offer, and how do they get in contact with you?
Okay, so to find me either way, whether you're interested in mentoring or the business startups that I offer, or to be a client, you can find me at healthrecoverycentre.com.au, and my phone number and all of my details are on there. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. So that's about it.
Perfect and awesome. And as always, guys, those links will be down in the description box below. So click on them. And again, if you're a naturopath or a dietitian and you're looking at some really good gut healthing mentoring, or even just a natural therapist who wants to expand their business, please get in contact with Lizzie. And if you think that you've got something going on with the gut health and it is affecting your mental health, please, again, get in touch with Lizzie, because I'm sure she's going to provide some really good insights. But we'd just like to thank you so much for coming on Therapist Spotlight tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, you too. And for everybody else out there, have a great night, and we'll catch you all next time. See ya.
Thank you for listening to Therapist Spotlight. If you would like to know more about ANTA, visit us at www.anta.com.au.